Ladies and gentlemen, Carol Morley. Very welcome to you. Tell me, you saw the story 5 years ago. Just tell me how it formed.
Yeah, well, I saw the story in the Sun, and actually, as soon as I saw it, I thought I want to make a film about this, because I just couldn't believe that it could happen. But I think what mostly I couldn't believe was the television was on weirdly. It was this sort of idea of these flickering images, but also it was how anonymous the story was, and nobody got hold of a photograph of Joyce and all of that. And I became quite obsessed very quickly. And I think the next day I was sort of Googling the story to see if anything else came up. And people had started writing about the story in chat rooms as though it was already urban myth, really. Somebody wrote, because in the Sun it had the domestic violence. Anything that came up at the inquest was sort of in that Sun article. And someone had written, it must have been one miserable bitch, that no one would remember her or think about her. And I think that then absolutely made me want to tell the story. But not being a particularly, I don't make factual television, as we talked about there. I just want to tell stories, and I think for me, everything has a kind of, when I look at something that I want to make a film about, I don't sort of impose a kind of way of making it or a form on it. I want to find out what that form is from what happens with the story. So I think for me it became sort of important early on to meet the people involved in the story, which were like the police who didn't want to know, and the electricity board, all the like why was the electricity on for all those years, but no, I never found that out, because no one really knows. It's just a bit of an oversight. But I met Lynn Featherstone, the MP, and then I put adverts out. Is Martin here tonight, by the way? Do we have Martin in the house? Thank you. Martin is in the house. Martin is in the house. I'm sorry, Martin. Like, just get everyone turning around to me. Anyway, but the point of mentioning Martin was that I put adverts, because I didn't know any names of people that had known Joyce or anything like that, and I really wanted to get people that had known her in a sense that she had existed and been in this world. And so when I saw the original article, it never really occurred to me, I could dramatise this, or I could make something around this story. It felt to me very, very important to kind of almost witness that Joyce Vincent had really existed. So I put adverts everywhere, and in fact on the internet, and Martin was the very first person to answer. In the film it looks like everybody was friends, but they'd all lost touch and everything, so it sort of brought people together.
So you kind of went on a detective journey yourself.
It was very much, and very odd things happened, like somebody phoned me, he wouldn't give his name, but he said that Joyce had known Betty Wright, so I wrote to Betty in America, and it took quite a few months for her to get back to me. But when she did, she actually never did, but it was Alistair who'd been her tour manager here, so he got in touch, and everybody in the film found out that Joyce had died through me. But the thing was, early on, so I started to get the real people, but I always felt, or I don't know if always, but at some point I began to feel that I wanted to create a beautiful film, a film that had a lot of music in it, which is expensive to clear. I also wanted to create a film that would, there's that term unreliable narrators, it's not about that, but I think it's more about people that essentially are telling their point of view and their views, and I wanted to create a lot of space in the film that, the film doesn't end up, saying this was Joyce, but it's about people sort of thinking about who she was to them. But I really did want to create this sort of inner life of Joyce, which is where the kind of reimaginings or reconstructions or whatever you call them came up, really.
When did they enter the story? When you met everyone else?
I think as I first met Martin, and he said Joyce always wanted to be a singer, and I think at that point I really wanted to, and first saw the photographs of Joyce and everything. So I think I wanted to. I started with nobody, literally nobody, and I think I wanted to turn Joyce into a somebody, and somebody that had existed, and for that I did really want to resurrect her and create somebody that stood for Joyce, rather than just be described or in pictures or in photographs. So taking that leap where you actually reinvent somebody, and so it was always very important for me to have the song "My Smile Is Just a Frown," which everyone wanted me to cut, really, let's face it,
Really?
or never wanted me to do in the first place, but yeah, I mean, you know, so there was a lot of, well, we can go into that a bit more, but I think it was a very difficult film to finance, because although people could see that there was something in the story itself, I think they saw it as a forensic, factual story, whereas I saw it very much as a film about inner life and all the other things. And so for me, you know, putting those songs in it and wanting to create kind of space for Joyce to have a voice in a way, rather than just everyone talking, life, was very important. But so it was, it's a mission to get people to believe and understand that a film could, not only was about the story, but it's also about how it's told. So that's why it took 5 years as well.
So you're pushing the genre and not giving in to making the traditional kind of journalistic revelatory film with talking heads.
Well, I mean, that's somebody else's film, but no one did it because they couldn't get anyone to talk to them or find a photograph of her. Because I think the journalistic approach at the time was very much like, you have to get the story in a week because it's only newsworthy for a week. And I know Alison Campsey at the local paper was quite frustrated. She was quite jealous that I was able to just take some time and look into it. I'm sure she would have loved to, but they just don't have those resources and possibilities. And so it has to be current. And then I think when it moves into being a story that maybe would get a factual commission, then maybe it has to be a story that's, told in particular ways or a particular way, and certainly would have commentary, and certainly would be much more forcing on people what I thought, and certainly not having loads of questions unanswered, that's for sure. Sorry about that.
One more thing before we go to audience questions. So just tell me how difficult it was to finance.
Well, I think me and Kyra, the producer here tonight, one thing that we did is we got rejected by everyone that ever existed in Britain anyway. So we went to Ireland and they were amazing. But then luckily people do leave their jobs and then you just reapply. And that's the and I think basically, fortunately people moved on. And we would reapply, and in fact one day we will have to tell the whole stories, because in some ways the reason we got some money from somewhere was a case of mistaken identity, because they actually thought that it was a film by James Marsh. So they said, we'd love to be on board, and then it turned out it wasn't James Marsh, and Kyra said, no, you've got to let us in and meet you anyway, so that at least they
give you money in the end?
Eventually, after 3 meetings. But I think it's that thing that
James Marsh did
Man on Wire, and amazing filmmaker. But so it's sort of like, it was a comedy of errors, really, a comedy of errors, but
you did have a little anecdote about a nameless commission.
Well, that was something that never happened, but I went to them and said, I want to make this film, and they were actually really interested, but then I was getting the treatment back with things in red that I couldn't do, and at that point we walked away.
Well done. Any questions, anyone? Yes.
I was really fascinated about her relationship, or lack thereof, with her sisters, and I just wondered whether you managed to get to the bottom of that at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was in touch with one of Joyce's sisters early on and met her, and they really didn't want to be in the film, and I sort of really respected that, because I did want to make a film about consent, but as kind of it's gone on, I have learned some more, because when I did meet the sister, I was under the impression that they'd hired a detective after Joyce had died to find out what had happened to her, because they said I'd done a better job than he did, but since they've seen the film, a large part of the family has seen the film, she said that they hired the detective, but Joyce had already died, but they'd hired the detective, and they also went to the Salvation Army, but they couldn't find her. But then the family did find an address for Joyce, which was the last address, and wrote her a letter, but she didn't respond, so they just thought she'd moved on. So you see, I always thought what's fascinating for me is that when I read the story initially, you make certain assumptions that people have let her down, but in the end I started to feel that Joyce had deliberately moved away from people, and because of who she was in the sense of how she presented herself to people. They really thought she didn't want to know them. So that was sort of the case with the family. And they were all really busy getting on with their lives and bringing up children. And they really thought Joyce, I think the issue was she just kept moving around, and sort of as she moved on, would shut a door behind her, really. So I think that's sort of what happened there.
But that's one of the things that we talked about earlier, isn't it? That people say,
I know it's a bit
weird. Of course, this couldn't happen to an ordinary person. This is extraordinary. But in fact, I was talking to a lady who's at the back there, who is the curator of the cinema, and we were saying the thing about it is that actually it could so easily happen to all of us. In fact, when you watch a film, you feel quite close to the experience of this person, and a lot of people sort of live their lives in compartments and don't want people to, so they wouldn't be chased.
Absolutely, and I think with the family as well, to me when I met them, because I think also there's a kind of Jeremy Kyle culture and also a blame culture, and I think when you meet them, they do feel incredibly, it's devastating, and I think that when I started to think about my own family, think, oh God, we had an auntie here and blah 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 there, and I'm not sure why my mum never really talked to my auntie Liz, and then people die, and then you never find out, and that sort of goes on, I think, and in fact, making this film, my mum did die, and because I was so busy making it, I never properly went to visit her or anything, so I was doing interviews when she died, and I thought, so I think all those things of, but it's only in retrospect when you think God and you look back and you think, I wish I'd done things differently. So I think it is a film about regret, and in this, with the family not being in it, I think it's also possibly about friendship, which is maybe not looked at and that much in things, really, about that acknowledgement of what friendship can do and what it means, I suppose.
Yes. Did you ever find out who the actual Christmas presents were for?
What I did discover was that the contents of the flat were destroyed due to contamination before the family ever got there. I mean, my feeling of it all, I can't say this for sure, but my feeling was that they wrote those flats off a bit, so they didn't, I'm sure the police did record it and stuff, but obviously I've never seen that. But they did actually destroy everything, so I don't know who the presents were for. But I think it's one of those mysteries that will, do your head in more you think about it. I mean, some people wonder if she wrapped them for herself, but I always feel that it is for me it was always a sign of hope that she was going back out. And people said she was a very generous person, and the family said she'd get the nephews and nieces presents and all that, so I always thought it was for them and some friends. Martin in fact said she once brought him an Ainsley Harriet cookbook, so that was it. And some pyjamas. So I did try and find out what sort of present she brought to people, but...
Okay. How many times did you cry in the making of this film?
How many times did I cry? Did you cry watching it?
I was very sad.
Yeah. I think it became a deeply disturbing film to make because I felt, I didn't want to be exploitative, but also it felt important to put certain things in it. So I think my conscience was all over the place. And I think I did start dreaming about Joyce, and I didn't want to ever be sort of sentimental about her, but obviously I still now feel, I feel very close to somebody I didn't know, which is quite strange, and I certainly I think I've been profoundly moved since the film as well by how people have related to Joyce and how somebody so forgotten is now so remembered. But making the film, I definitely think I cried quite a bit, but it was more not, it was a bit like, I cried because I couldn't get the money, and I thought it was such an important story to tell. But, for instance, when I met, the sister and stuff like that, and when I spoke to other members of the family, I felt that I had to be very, objective really, and not get too worked up with them, because that felt so unfair, because it's their true grief, But I think what I brought to it for me was I probably cried more for Joyce than my mum in a weird way. So that's just how odd it is, or making a film. But I did find it quite disturbing. Also the people in it, like Martin, and just the people, and having to tell them that Joyce had died and stuff like that.
Carol, what's the connection, if any, between your search for yourself in alcohol years, absent person, and this film. And
I mean, I made this film called The Alcohol Years about 10 years ago or so, which is where I go back and look at my scurrilous past in Manchester when I was a teenager. And I think more than anything I realised that it's I suppose the stories I'm interested in a way are about marginalised and people that are outside of maybe usually being looked at. And I think that, you know, it sounds really weird, but I think when I read that story, if it had been a 40-year-old man, I might not have made the film. It felt a story about a woman that, and somehow it resonated with me, and not because I ever felt I'll end up alone, but you know, maybe we all do to some extent, but I think there was something that resonated, and being the same age as Joyce and stuff like that, and I found it, and I think I was obsessed with it in a different way than The Alcohol Years, because I suppose in The Alcohol Years I was interested in who those people were that I'd forgotten or what they were saying, but in this I wanted to profile Joyce, I think, far more than I ever profiled. I wanted to disappear in that film, in The Alcohol Years, and in this I wanted Joyce to really, really appear. So I felt in that I was sort of erasing somebody in a way, and in this I was bringing someone back to life. But I think you know, it's an interesting thing, and one that you sort of have to reflect on. Someone wrote to me and said, did it take you a long time to find a story about an absent person to make a film about again? And I was like, oh, that wasn't you though, unless it was a pseudonym, but you know, I don't know, I think you're drawn to certain material.
You said also earlier that you were very interested in newspapers, and a lot of your films have come out of looking at...
Well, I've been thinking about that as well, and I think small newspaper stories, you know, often they are just reported facts, you know, because obviously the Sun will report facts via local newspapers. They don't actually attend the inquest, so it will be the local reporter that will have gone and sat there all day waiting for the story. But I love the small stories, I think. And I remember my dad killed himself when I was 11, which I'm sure is partly on my obsessions, but I remember somebody at school going, I read about your dad in the local paper. And I remember at the time being 11 and I'd never seen it and being quite haunted by that. So I've been thinking recently, because doing these Q&As and stuff like that, is that why I'm interested in newspapers sort of thing? This kind of thing about what lays behind it, the real stories or the extended stories in a way.
That's what, you know, I insist that documentary is an art form, and really you're an artist, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's digging into your own driven inventiveness that comes out of those kind of things. So I don't think you should fight it.
No. But the thing is, I believe in authorship, but I don't believe in commentaries or telling. I want audiences to be able to come and, you know, bring their own things to it and to be open. So I'm not particularly interested in what I think of it, but I know I'm interested in a way of making it that could communicate something beyond factual or beyond telling people what to think.
And you have to be pretty driven to tell it, to take 5 years to try and raise money.
Or mad.
Well, that's
madness has a lot.
Another question.
How did you know when your film was done? Because presumably you could have gone on researching and interviewing people forever. How did you know that's it, this is the story?
I'm not sure I do, really. But, I think there was a, you know, because it could, I mean, in some ways, you know, information comes forward and afterwards and all of that, and I think there will be a kind of, it just seems to me with this film that there's a kind of, what do you call it? I mean, not a sequel, I wouldn't ever do that, but there is more information, people are discussing it, we've got a dreamsoflife.com website and people are writing on it, and so it seems to have a life that's taken off, which I love. But I think when I was making the film, for me, it was the Nelson Mandela stuff, because I don't know, there's something, because it was towards the end, and then there was other stuff, and you know, like in the editing process, sort of chipping it away. But for me, when we reached that point, it was, I knew then somehow, and the music in place and scoring it. It was just sort of making a sculpture, really. And at some point, you have to go, I think you just know, because you know if you do any more, you'll kind of wreck what it is. Because it could be a number of things, I suppose. Does that make any sense?
Did you edit it?
She's not nodding. No.
Did you edit it as? Did you edit all the interviews together and then do the live, the perform bits?
So I had a script. Because I transcribed all the interviews myself. I really like knowing the material, and then scripted scenes, and then we met Chris, the editor, and then we got together and cut together a lot of the interviews.
So you had a structure?
Yeah, well, yeah, I had a structure, but also just got even more ideas, I suppose, about getting ideas really. And yeah, and then I went off and shot it. In Ireland, the bedsit is built in Ireland. That was a bit of a secret. So it's a very London story made in Ireland.
God bless the island.
Yeah, I forgot what I was saying. So
I'm
still thinking about finishing my film. It was like
how long did it take to cut all together?
What was it? 4 months? Go 5 months?
Yeah.
4 or 5 months.
That's pretty good.
We worked quite hard, long hours.
And did it slot into place?
The film?
Yeah.
Oh,
Or
there
did
were. It was a brilliant collaborative experience with the editor, and we'd, but I think it was just like sculpting something. It felt, sometimes things weren't working and you work on them longer, and then some things just come together, So it's.
And we can kind of all relate to the people that were part of Joyce's life, no matter how vaguely, And is that kind of the reason why you didn't include sort of subtitles? It's quite predictive. You could include who they are in relation to that.
Yeah. For me, it was, like when you caption people and you go, I don't know, John boyfriend early on, or John motor mechanic or whatever, or car salesman in this case, but it's sort of you're telling people, or you're defining someone early on, and I suppose I like it in a way that when you see the characters, if you like, the real people, they become like in a drama, you have to learn to get to know them. And like in a drama or a fiction film, by the end, you might even not remember someone's name, but you remember the quality of that character. So for me, I like you work out, and I think everyone knows by the end of film Martin's name and John's name, and maybe not some of the others. So for me, it's like, let's get to know these people and their relationships without telling people what it is. So yeah.
Very good. And I'd like to thank Martin for coming and for being in the film. Well done. And thank you, Carol.